Very full agenda today. My name is Tom LeGrand, and I want to greet everyone. I'm thrilled that you were able to come here today. I'm the president of the IUSSP, the International Union for the Scientific Study of Population, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to this debate on should family planning programs in patriarchal societies use limited funds to further empower women or to involve men. This webinar has been organized by the IUSSP Scientific Panel on Couples' Reproductive Health and Fertility, which is led by Stan Becker, and who will be speaking next. The IUSSP has long used debates to draw out opposing viewpoints on important issues at our international population conferences, although this is the very first time we've held such a debate online. As such, this webinar will serve as a model for debates that will be held at our next IPC, International Population Conference, that will be taking place in early December of this year. We had planned to hold this event in Hyderabad, India, but due to the effects of the pandemic, especially in India at this point in time, the event has been moved fully online, although we're doing everything to maintain a certain Indian flavor to the event. The conference will cover 25 broad themes that are central to the population studies area, with COVID-19 being an important cross-cutting topic that will receive a good deal of attention. I'd like to encourage everyone here to participate, even if you aren't planning to present a study, as the program will be real interesting. It will be composed of the normal, regular scientific studies proposed by population specialists through the call for paper, but we're also planning a number of invited panel discussions, debates, and keynote addresses by very prominent thinkers in our field. Also, I just wanted to mention, we are trying to think of ways to make it more accessible to people who are not on the program. So keep your eye on the website, and we will be informing you of that as things go on. Okay, with that introduction, given that we do have a very full agenda, I will pass the microphone on to the next speaker. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm Stan Becker. I'm chair of the panel that's putting this on. Next slide. So several professionals in family planning who I told about this debate said they disagreed with the polarization of the debate. But we all know that family planning funds are limited, and there are hard choices on what programs to give priority to. Next slide. So it reminds me of a debate I have in my undergraduate class. We have, should more national and international funds for health go towards family planning or towards child survival? And this is a question that donors and governments, they have to decide every funding cycle, really. You know, so of course, child survival programs help reduce fertility. And yes, family planning programs help increase child survival. Those are true. And yes, male involvement can help empower women, and empowering women can lead to male involvement. So yes, it's not a either or, and we might have a debate someday on that zero sum sort of idea. But anyway, but remember that funding is limited. So perhaps from this debate, some study design will be done to test the cost effectiveness of these two strategies. And this is what's been lacking. We know that male involvement can lead to better contraceptive or higher contraceptive use. Anyway, so we need rigorous experimental designs to see where it's best to put funds, limited funds. Next slide. So I'd like to introduce the speakers and other folks. Moderator is Neetu John. She's a panel member and is at Columbia University. And we have helping her is Dana Sarnak from Johns Hopkins University. Your questions that come in, she'll be feeding to Neetu for the Q&A part. So put in your questions whenever you want in Q&A, not in the chat. And so we have Alan Kabangeni, sorry about my pronunciation, who's at Makerere University in Uganda, and Anju Malhotra from the UN University International Institute of Global Health. They're on the team for Further Empower Women. And we have Fudumila Olaloran, again, sorry my pronunciation for me, from the University of Ibadan in Nigeria, and Nkechi Owowo from the University of Ghana. They're the team for involving men. Next slide. I'm sorry, we'll have closing remarks by Jean-Francois Kobiani of the, from Burkina Faso, and also on the IUSSP Council, and assist us. Thank you. Next slide. Okay, so now I'll turn things over to Neetu and get on with the debate.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this exciting debate topic. So I'm just going to describe the process that we're going to follow. So we'll start the debate with a coin flip. The team that wins can choose to go first, or they can decide to go second. Each debater will get about 8 minutes, and we will switch between the teams. After everyone has spoken, each team will also get a chance to respond to the other team. Then we'll have 20 minutes for the question and answers from the audience. And please use the Q&A feature to ask your questions, and you can ask them throughout the debate. Dana will be looking at the questions and sort of compiling them for us so that we can ask them at the Q&A time. And please make sure your questions are addressed to a particular team or to a debater. Or if it's a general question for both the teams to address, please indicate that. For your general comments, just use the chat. And the teams will have about a minute to respond to each of your questions. Following the Q&A, we'll do a second poll to see if the debaters changed your minds. And then finally, Jean-Francois will give us a summary of the debate, and then we'll close. Next. This is just more guidelines for the Q&A. So you can either ask a question or you can vote for the question that you like, and we will make sure that the most popular questions are definitely answered by the debaters. Next. I think this is okay. Thank you for joining us. Once again, I'm going to start. I'm going to do a coin flip share my screen to do the coin flip to make sure we know who wins. So the team Empower has decided to take heads. Oh, looks like Team Empower has won. So they get to choose whether they want to go first or second. So over to Anju and Alan.
I think we prefer to go second. Alan, will you chime in?
Yes, I will.
Okay, then, Funmi and Nikichi, who's going first?
I'm going first. I'll share my screen. All right. Hello, everyone. Over the next few minutes, I intend to convince you that involving and engaging men is critical for the success of family planning programs. Empowering women with available funds is great, but the best bang for the buck must include involving men because it makes cultural sense, it makes reproductive health sense, it makes generational sense, and it makes programmatic sense. Male involvement in a patriarchal society displays cultural sensitivity. Involving men makes them more sensitive to women's needs and thus more supportive of improving their status. Men are key decision makers in all areas, including women's reproductive health. In patriarchal settings, men play a critical role in women's ability to access healthcare services, but they're often not well informed about women's reproductive health needs. Men provide social recognition for women, and in patriarchal societies, women of marriageable age do not feel complete until they have a husband of their own. Men are traditionally the breadwinners and sometimes the sole source of household finances, and so many women are economically dependent on their male partners. In patriarchal societies, empowering women without involving the men has the potential to lead to unintended consequences, such as intimate partner violence, such as the man taking on another wife, such as divorce. We know that women's disproportionate experiences of ill health are only partially explained by biology, and they're gendered. And according to the World Health Organization, in women, more than a third of all healthy life lost is due to reproductive health issues. On the other hand, among men, this is just about 12% of healthy life lost due to reproductive health issues. Research shows that involving men in family planning programs leads to an increase in contraceptive use. When men and women are making contraceptive decisions together, there may be an increased utilization of reproductive health services, according to a study by Chala and colleagues. Also, there are examples such as in Niger with the schools for husbands. There will be a ripple effect when we involve men using the limited funds that are available in family planning programs, as their strong influence on female children will transfer the benefits from the program to the next generation. Family planning programs go beyond contraceptive services and should include the scope of family planning services, including basic infertility services, sexually transmitted disease services, and preconception health services. And these services ideally should include both the man and the woman, and so couples. Therefore, men cannot be left out of family planning services more broadly. Programs that target both men and women encourage better male involvement. In a Cambodian program, involving men led to a reduction in the prevalence of HIV/AIDS, as well as maternal and infant mortality. To sum up, men must be part of all programs that seek to improve women's health in all patriarchal societies where men's accepted position and power may lead to unintended consequences if they're not in the know. Involving men is key, but it should not be done through a one-size-fits-all approach. Context matters and must be taken into account when using limited funds to include men in family planning programming. So do remember that involving men makes sense. It makes cultural sense. It makes reproductive health sense. It makes programmatic sense. And so it's really important that we involve men for the ripple effect that will follow. Thank you.
Thanks, Funmi. Over to Alan.
Thank you, Nitu. Right, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon and good evening. I'm here to share with you, our audience, the need for the family planning programs, especially to use the limited funds to further empower women. And specifically, when I talk about women, we're saying, can we provide a situation? We are almost there. But can we have a situation where we have these ladies, the women, act freely, able to exercise their rights equally to that of men, but most importantly, where they're able to fulfill their potential and then determine what comes out in their lives. And in this way, they're able to have freely plan the number of children they want to have, space and time the number of children, which actually is a basic human right. And when we say this empowering or empowerment of women, we're saying, can we have more education? Can we have these women all, support funds where can go into supporting and having women taking longer in school, given adequate information so they can be able to decide accordingly. But most importantly also, for them to be able to participate in the labor market, providing the different incentives that can support this. And where we look at a woman or the value of a girl at the household level being valued, not looked at someone who is going to be getting or who will be getting married soon. And when we look at what is given or what is presented here, we're saying that the literature is showing that, these women who cannot make decisions, it affects their lives. It affects the reproductive decisions that they make. And the patriarchal societies, what do? All they do is to show and to have the men making key decisions. Imagine decisions related to a woman's health. She has to wait for this husband who has to decide to approve when she goes to this health facility. If she wants to use a method, some have found themselves actually using methods stealthily. Is that what we want to push for? How can we have these more women where we have more who are engaged in the labor market? They can have little resources on themselves and they can be able to take up decisions in different avenues, where in this case, we'll reduce on what my opponent has just mentioned when we talk about issues to do with violence. And specifically, when we have our funds, coming in to support the discussion that we are having, can we continue to further empower these women? Research has shown that yes, with increased, decision-making, especially at the fact that the woman takes the lead, this woman who is educated, this woman who is able to use methods of contraception, ultimately it has linked so well, even when it gets to maternal and their health. In general, we've also seen evidence has shown where we've seen reduced unsafe abortions, will have increased access to information. And we're looking at information to the young girl, information where they can voluntarily make decisions to use family planning services, where they don't have to get approvals from the male partners. In terms of education, evidence is there ably, and we've seen that fertility certainly has shown declines, especially with women. It links arguably very well when we talk about higher education attainment, links very, very well with increased use of contraception. And in this case, we are seeing fewer girls where we have very high teenage pregnancies. Can we have interventions there? Can we have support where we'll see to it that girls are kept in school? And in that way, we hope and we see that these are the same young girls who will be empowered, they can be able to be educated, they get employed. And certainly, as we've seen in the evidence, in the surveys that have been done, where those fertility rates are lowest among the educated, among the employed, amongst those with the highest wealth in quintile. And when we look at the national level in the different countries, especially in the patriarchal societies, we'll see their active participation in the labor market. We'll see reduced household poverty. And my role here is to show you the benefits that we have if we have increased resources in that direction, which can trickle down to where we can see the women empowered. And most importantly, this is it's very critical when you talk about issues to do with sustainable population growth. If we don't have that information that trickles down to this young woman, to this mother who can be able to decide, can be able to go and is empowered, has information, has some monies on her if she needs to go to the health facility where she doesn't have to be, to fear to be beaten, but can ably make decisions. In this way, of course, we'll see that the burden that we see that relates to non-use, discontinuation, and inconsistency in family planning uptake will certainly reduce. I am pushing, we are voting for evidence-based intervention and programming. So empowering women will lead to successful family planning programs and certainly fertility decline. And the question now is how we're going to it, and my opponent is going to comfortably do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Over to Nakiji.
Hello, everyone. The motion before us today is whether family planning programs within patriarchal societies should use their limited funds to further empower women or to involve men. Now, my opponents argue that these limited funds should be assigned to further empowering women rather than used to involve men. Now, I disagree with this position for a number of reasons. As we would all agree that neither of these options is necessarily bad. We are asked to debate the best course of action, however, given limited funds. To this end, I would like to point out that although empowering women can take men out of the equation, the reverse is not necessarily true. Family planning programs that involve men encourage a critical awareness among women and men of gender roles and norms, in addition to fostering couple communications about issues relating to family planning and reproductive health. Family planning programs that involve men also teach negotiation skills and decision-making techniques related to sexual and reproductive health issues. In a study that was carried out in India, the feedback received was that the training enabled couples to effectively and confidently communicate with one another and also negotiate on issues relating to family planning. In Malawi, the Male Malawi Motivator Project found that men involved in family planning programs had increased use of contraceptives primarily due to the enhanced spousal communications. In Nepal, the Men as Partners intervention found that men were more likely to accompany women to antenatal care visits, help with women's housework during and after pregnancy, and then help take children to the clinic for immunizations following their involvement in the program. Family planning programs that facilitate opportunities for men and women to discuss contraceptive use jointly can actually encourage greater gender equality by improving marital communication and empowering men with a deeper knowledge of and empathy for their wives' experiences. Involving men in these programs can therefore be helpful to men, but also for women's own well-being and cogency. Essentially, involving men kills two birds with one stone. In patriarchal societies, where men are identified as heads of households and the primary decision makers, it is unrealistic to expect them to contribute effectively to discussions on family planning without sufficient information. Given the long-held position that family planning and contraceptive use is women's business, men have remained in the dark with very little information. Now, in a study of 500 married men in Nigeria, for example, only 5% of them had ever been involved in any family planning programs. And this has important implications for their understanding of sexual and reproductive health. Now, as important decision makers within the household, a lack of knowledge and information on family planning matters would likely lead men to take less informed positions. Women often hesitate to use family planning methods for fear of disapproval by their spouses. However, it's important to note that men's disapproval often stems from misconceptions that they may have about family planning that they likely pick up among their social networking groups. For example, some men believe that contraceptives burn up all of the woman's eggs or raise her blood pressure to dangerous levels. Condoms, according to some men, can fall off and get stuck inside a woman. Vasectomy is also thought to render men either impotent or mentally challenged. Some men also believe that an IUD can travel through a woman's body and get into her heart or her brain, or could even rust and lead to important health complications. Some men also believe that when their women use contraceptives, it can lead them to become more promiscuous. Now, these ideas and many others could easily be dispelled by the inclusion of men in these conversations through the use of well-targeted family planning awareness campaigns. Now, another reason why men should be involved in the family planning programs is the role that they can play as buffers between their wives and would-be custodians of cultural norms. Now, in many patriarchal societies, high fertility is a sign of a man's virility, and having many children is celebrated intensely. Now, although the practice is waning over time, in parts of Ghana, for example, a whole cow would be killed and the whole town would erupt in celebration when a woman birthed her 10th child. Now, cultural custodians like mothers-in-law stand ready to ensure that the lineage is continued and women fulfill their reproductive duties. It's important to remember, empowering a woman does not insulate her from cultural expectations. Studies have shown that where in-laws do not feel that they have sufficient input into women's fertility decisions, the end result can be IPV. Bringing men into the equation therefore limits women's exposure to penalties when the couple decides to deviate from societal expectations of high fertility. There is also the matter of healthcare workers, who are often a part of the communities and cultures in which they work. Many of these health providers often make it more difficult than it needs to be for a woman to get the family planning services that she needs. For example, many health providers often tell women, whether they are empowered or not, that they cannot have access to family planning methods without spousal approval first. Perhaps a testament to the patriarchy. Now, if the point is to maximize the effects of these programs, especially where funds are limited, then the cultural context cannot be ignored. Men can, in many cases, be a critical source of support, especially when the empowerment agenda and the involvement in the family planning programs presumably do not extend to the entire community. Now, another reason why I disagree with the position that limited funds should be assigned to further empowering women rather than used to involve men is the moral argument. Simply, decisions that women may take following family planning interventions are also likely to affect their male partners. Why then should men be prevented from taking part in the reproductive health decision-making process for any reason? I submit that the notion that family planning is women's business only is outdated. And in the same way that we would not approve of men taking sole decisions on matters that equally affect women, we should not accept men's exclusion from a process that so intimately involves them. There is sufficient evidence demonstrating men's desire for information and services, as well as men's positive response to existing programming. Childbearing is a process that involves both partners. Any other reproductive health decisions and programs should involve the couple as well. Now, it is unlikely that men's central role in decision-making around fertility will be significantly diminished anytime soon. It's important to recognize that involving men in decisions relating to reproductive health can help to improve women's position and well-being within their households. The basic tenets of a patriarchal society are that power is held primarily by men within the community, and men are the primary decision makers within the household. Expecting men to make informed input into matters of family planning and reproductive health without equipping them with the relevant information is setting these programs up for failure and setting women up for unnecessary conflict within their households, particularly given the cultural context. The potential for men to act as buffers between their wives and cultural custodians is another benefit of involving men in discussions related to family planning and reproductive health. Finally, from a moral perspective, the need for men's involvement in these decisions is undeniable, as women's actions and decisions resulting from these interventions also affect men. So to conclude, programs that involve men and address men's reproductive health needs would ultimately yield more benefits rather than women-only focused approaches. How can we maximize the benefits of family planning if we leave out one half of the major actors? Where funds are decidedly limited, should these not be applied to strategies that have measured positive impacts, involve the major actors fairly and equally, and with fewer negative implications for women? Thank you.
Thank you, Nikichi. Over to Anju.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm pleased to be with you today to argue why family planning programs in patriarchal societies should use limited funds to further empower women rather than involving men. As my partner has argued, there are many different dimensions of women's empowerment: reproductive, economic, social, and political. But I'm going to argue today that the control that women have over their sexuality and reproductive lives is at the root of patriarchy. And women's empowerment through regaining that control is foundational for achieving gender equality. And in contrast to my opponents, I'm going to be arguing that our purpose is here to not reinforce patriarchy, but to overcome it. And thus thus empowering women to manage their childbearing on their own terms needs to be the topmost priority for family planning programs. First of all, having women have control over their childbearing is the fundamental priority on women's rights. Most other rights cannot be achieved without that basic right. this is a task that falls squarely within the scope of the family planning field. So if we're going to spend money, then family planning field should be spending money on things that are its primary job. And this is first and foremost their job. And this is a task that family planning programs have been struggling, but have not accomplished even over the last 40 years that we have been watching their evolution. So what do family planning programs need to deliver for women's reproductive empowerment? And so I'm focusing first and foremost on women's reproductive empowerment and the task that is within the purview of family planning programs and their fundamental job. First and foremost, they need to address women's needs and barriers on family planning. And second, they need to ensure contraceptive choice and quality. And the issue here is that family planning programs have not done this successfully, even though they have been in operation for so many years. And unless we do this, we can't go anywhere else. This is the foundation of good family planning programs and women's reproductive empowerment. And I say that because a lot of people associate women having agency and choice as the fundamental aspect of their empowerment. But women having agency and choice is part of empowerment only if they also have resources and outcomes that many of us have defined as essential parts of empowerment. And if they have only lousy options to choose from, then their choice is not very meaningful. And in many parts of the world right now, the way family planning programs are delivered, women have pretty lousy options to choose from. I would also argue that if we're going to improve family planning programs so that women are reproductively empowered, we need to shift our attention more to supply side rather than demand side interventions to empower women. A lot of our attention has gone on the soft side, demand side issues such as male involvement, such as educating women on contraceptives, such as trying to make them want to use family planning more. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's a good thing. Women should want to use family planning more. Men should want to use family planning more. But the issue is, if the family planning options are not there, what does having that choice mean? If a woman's only choice after having 2 kids and she wants to take a break from having another child is to either rely on a poor supply and shifty supply of contraceptive pills that give her side effects or go get sterilized, that's not a very meaningful choice. And that's why I think supply side action to empower women is what's needed more than anything else before we go anywhere else about demand side interventions. So what do we need to do to empower women on reproductive choice and quality? We need to expand contraceptive options. Contraceptive technology needs to give meaningful attention to women's concerns about health and side effects. We need to give women a full menu of short and long-term methods that are conveniently offered in one single location, rather than having community health workers giving them short-term methods and then mobile clinics or other sorts, social franchises trying to give them long-term methods, in which case they can either have one or the other. We need to give them consistent supply. We need to trust women to be able to choose their own method and use it well, rather than giving them a choice of 1 or 2 that the policymakers or family planning clinics think are the right thing for them. We need well-trained providers who are going to be respectful of women and who are paid well and understand their job and do it well, instead of trying to do 200 other things that they can't even do their basic job accurately. We need a wider public sector service delivery where service and method options for women are offered, not just for women who are in marriages, but who are in a number of different circumstances. It's not just about married women alone. Obviously, they're a big part of it. So on my concluding thoughts, I would argue that male involvement, social and other demand side interventions are important, But quality services focused on women's needs are prerequisite before we get to any of these other types of interventions. And currently, we do not have those. Women's empowerment reproductively, by having that choice, by having that quality, by having that option, has to be the starting point. And on male involvement, there are many pending questions that we need to answer before we start doing these programs and investing in these programs, and we're not there yet. We don't even know exactly what involving men means. There are many definitions to that. We don't know which men we should involve. There are men who would be very supportive of their wives, but then there are men whose wives or women they're in relationships with have no desire to involve those men. And that's something that we need to think about. We don't have proof that male involvement programs necessarily switch more than attitudes in the short term and behavior in the long term. We don't know if these programs have been sustainable. Most of them have not gone to scale. So there are a lot of issues that we can discuss about potentially improving male involvement program, but first we need to have reproductive empowerment for women. And last but not least, I would say that once we empower women on their reproductive lives, once women have the ability to have children when they want, as many as they want, and that's within their control, then they also have the ability to pursue education, employment, participate in public life, have alternatives to bad marriages and relationships, to IPV, and be actors rather than targets for social and economic and political change. And that's where the starting point in investments need to be. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anju. Thank you to all debaters for their excellent points. Now I invite the involved men team if they want to respond to the women's empowerment team. So over to Funmi and Nikichi. You have 3 minutes.
Sure, I'll start off and then Nkechi will continue. I must say that we know that women have to be empowered, but our argument is that it's not enough to empower women without involving the men. Leaving the men out can have unintended consequences, as we had said earlier. I'd just like to pick on a few of the points that have been made by my colleagues. Alan said that we should give women decision-making power. Certainly, agreed, but without involving men, if you give women decision-making power in a patriarchal setting, then there's likely to be unintended consequences. I mean, there's research that shows that this could lead to intimate partner violence. It could lead to the man taking on another wife, and so on and so forth. So yes, we need to give women decision-making power, but this should be in communication with her partner. She can make decisions with her husband in the know, because we're talking about a patriarchal society. And linked to that, Anju said that they're not trying to reinforce patriarchy, but to overcome it. Absolutely, but baby steps. We can't overcome patriarchy in one day. And so one of the ways, an important pathway to overcoming patriarchy would be to involve the men in order to be able to address gender norms and keep them, keep them at the center of the solution. And I think that involving men is a very important pathway toward addressing patriarchy. If you try to address patriarchy without involving the men, then a lot of things will just backfire. Another thing Anju said that I'd like to address is, she said we don't know which men to involve. I would argue that we should first have the programs to involve men, and then men can self-select into our programs. Maybe there's some men who don't want to be involved, that's true, but there are definitely men who would be happy to be involved and who are seeking to be involved. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you very much. So I know I don't have too much time left, but I'd like to touch on a few of the points that were made, first of all, by Alan. So Alan did mention that we need to empower women, give them the chance to make their own choices, because men tend to decide on everything, in addition to the family planning methods that women should use. We agree on this, but there's also the point that if men don't have enough information on the decisions they are making, it's unlikely that these decisions will be very effective. See, so we need to make sure that men are involved in these discussions so that they have the full knowledge of the benefits, okay, of some of these programs. And then when they are making the decisions with their partners, these are more likely to yield better outcomes. There was also the point made by Anju. She talked about the fact that, there are supply limitations when we think about some of these family planning services. That is true. And perhaps that is all the more reason why men need to be involved, right? Because if men are also on board with these family planning, with the agenda, there are some methods, contraceptive methods, that may not need, outside resources. As long as the man is on board, we can accomplish or achieve the family planning objectives. So this is another reason why perhaps men need to be brought on board, because if they're aligned, we can reach these objectives, even if we experience some supply side limitations with these methods. I would also like to say quickly that I disagree with the statement that Anju made when she said that there's not enough involvement on, there's not enough evidence on male involvement. Indeed, I mentioned a number of different programs that have showed that involving men actually leads to greater use of family planning services, improves couple communication. We have seen evidence in places like Malawi, like India, like Nepal, like Nigeria, like Kenya. I could go on. So that statement is not true. And so I think that it's another argument in favor of making sure that men are on board and involved in these processes to make sure that we get the maximum benefit from these family planning programs. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to Anju, and Alan, you get an extra minute because they took 4 minutes.
Okay, I'll start. So first of all, let me just say that on the unintended consequences, there are a lot of unintended consequences by involving men as well. So there are women who are in very bad marital relationships. I did a study a few years back where we're looking at contraception and abortion, and there was a bimodal distribution. 40% of the women were in fairly good relationships over their lifetime. Involving the men had been a good thing and it had helped them. 40% of the women had no interest in involving the men. They were afraid of the men. They wanted to do whatever they were doing because the men had such power in their lives that women needed to have this space for themselves, and they were getting beaten up because they were involving men. We also have situations where you're involving men, and then because a man is going to a clinic with his wife, you can have the sense that he's supportive of her, or it can just reinforce the idea that a woman can't go to the clinic by herself and she always needs male protection. So there are a lot of unintended consequences of involving men as well. Secondly, I would argue that the studies that we have on male involvement, yes, there are plenty of studies on male involvement, but in fact, I've been looking at the systematic reviews and studies, all of the studies on male involvement. So I talk about not having evidence from having spent the last 6 months looking at precisely at these studies. I don't know of very many studies that show male involvement producing long-term results. We have short-term results of attitudinal change and limited results that show behavioral change, but we don't know if that stuff lasts. How do we think that men who are that patriarchal, who have that much control in women's lives, go through a 2-day or a 1-day or a 2-hour program and have changed their attitudes and their behavior for the rest of their lives when they are living in an environment that is constantly reinforcing patriarchy? So we don't have evidence that this stuff lasts for a long term. We don't have 10-year studies that show us. And we also don't have any of these programs going to scale. They're all being done by NGOs and they're not being taken up. The government capacity that I just told you about can't even deliver basic family planning appropriately. How are you getting those government workers or NGO workers at scale to involve men in a way that is going to have a meaningful effect? So there are a lot of reasons to do further investigation of this. And I think if we have to get down to the basics first, let's empower women reproductively.
Thank you very much, Kechi and Funi, for the comments that you have raised. Without a doubt, many patriarchal societies make the decisions. And I want to pitch on what my partner, my colleague has just mentioned, Andrew. When we talk about the engagement, or rather empowering these women, and you actually highlighted very well the two critical issues that have been highlighted because of the fact that the women perhaps go out there in these health facilities or conceive without the consent and approval of their partners or their husbands. How about we continue to provide and support these women, give them the skills, you know, and that they are empowered in such a way that they can communicate with their partners, their husbands. In that way, we'll actually have reduced intimate partner, you know, violence. And then you're talking about someone else making decisions on another person's life. Maybe as researchers, we can think through and say, okay, wait a minute, this gentleman, this man has so much that is happening at the household. They have so many decisions to take. Why don't we empower this woman, even in a patriarchal society, that she doesn't have to wait for the man who's overwhelmed with so much work, you know? And then that way we are having very good households, safe homes, and of course, relating to the fact that this woman can be able to know. And then lastly, again, to link to what you mentioned.
Alan, I have to stop you. I think you've gone over, sorry. I think that we have the Q&A and you'll be able to discuss more of these points. Similar questions are coming up. So let's just, I think, move on to the Q&A. Is that okay? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's, so I'm going to start with a question for both the teams. So the question is, I wonder if you could talk a bit about short and long-term outcomes. Is there a short-term backlash against women's empowerment that can be alleviated by involving men? There are strong social norms around men's involvement in women's issues like family planning and reproductive health. How long does it take for these norms to change? What data do we have on long-term change? Thank you so much. So I think let's answer this question before I go to the next. Who wants to go first? Team involvement, since the Empower team was talking for a bit.
I think Andrew has actually addressed part of that question already in talking about the fact, and I agree, most of the programs are short-term programs. We don't have like, we don't have data to talk about long-term consequences and long-term effects of involving men. So there just isn't enough data in that regard. However, the short-term advantages appear to be clear to me.
Kichi, do you want to say anything, or should we move back to Team Empower to give us more information if they have?
No, I'm fine with my partners.
Okay, great. Do you want to say any additional things, Anju and Alan, or do you feel you've covered that?
All I can say is that we have a lot of evidence, if we look at historical studies, that when you empower women reproductively, women having access to contraception that they control, at the aggregate level, it changes societies in big ways, and it changes women's lives in big ways. So you look at the evidence from the introduction of the birth control pill, where women got control over their sexuality and reproduction for the first time on their own terms. And it had long-lasting changes, certainly in the Western world, that was revolutionary. And then we look at also in many countries now in the world where contraceptive use has increased, when contraceptive use has increased by giving women real choices, giving them, respecting them, that has led to multiplicative changes. So we have that change for decades and generations, and we need to really look at that evidence and go by it.
Great, thanks, great points. Alan, do you want to say something, or should we move to the next question?
Maybe just to add, I think there's need for that evidence where we can have studies and research to speak to the fact that beyond the short term, where we can see or have that male involvement, for us to have that information that we can arguably use and flag and say, yes, this has been done. Both if we can look at micro and aggregate level or macro level. Over to you.
Okay, so the next question is again for both the teams. How will this conversation change when reversible male contraception becomes available in the next 10 or so years? Will we program men's reproductive health services then, or will they be relegated to private service delivery options? Anyone can go first. Does the involved men want to go just because it's
Nkechi, do you want to start off?
I'm so sorry. Can you read over the question again? Because I cannot seem to find it in the Q&A.
how will this conversation change if reversible male contraceptions became available in the next 10 or so years?
Will they be relegated to private?
No takers, we can move to the next question.
I'm going to skip this one because it's difficult to say at
Okay.
this point.
Okay.
Just a quick one, Nitu. I think that I think I would still argue in favor of involving men, because if we talk about having separate male reproductive health services, we're bound to duplicate services, and that would not make economic sense. But if you're involving men in all reproductive health services, then the availability of a reversible male contraceptive would not call for starting male reproductive health services, but it would just call for the men to be involved in the existing reproductive health services, which is a further point to encourage involving both men and women in all reproductive health services.
Neetu, I can add maybe 1 or 2 points. I think it raises some very interesting questions for us. I think one is precisely what I was trying to say. What does involving men mean? And I think involving men can mean involving men so that they can be supportive partners to their wives. Involving men can mean involving men who make decisions in running family planning programs as policymakers and decision makers. Involving men can mean trying to norm change by changing men's attitudes. Involving men can mean having men take the responsibility for contraceptive use. So involving men is a complex term, and we need to be very clear about what aspect of it we're talking about. And a lot of the conversation has been involving men so that they can tell their wives that contraception is a good thing to do. But this raises a very different story, which is what is male responsibility for contraceptive use. And we have had that story only on condoms and vasectomies. And we know what a challenging issue this is with regard to definitions of masculinity, how men see their sexuality, and women being able to trust men when men are responsible for contraceptive use. And so I do think it'll open up questions about male involvement and male responsibility in a very different way that we would need to understand. I don't think we're there yet.
I guess a related question for the male involvement team. For many patriarchal societies in Africa, Latin America, and Asia, vasectomy is very low or effectively zero. Would your argument for male involvement include promotion of vasectomy? And what would you advise in this regard, since today many family planning programs seem to virtually ignore it altogether? And then for the empowered team, so this is especially for Anju. If we are focusing on the supply side as Anju proposes, then why would we not make the services friendly to women and men and ensure that a broad range of options are available? I'll let you decide who wants to go first, or should I just pick? Funmi, do you want to go? Anju, do you want to answer since it's specific to you?
Sure. Yes, I think that I would encourage vasectomy where this is culturally acceptable. I know that there are many settings, especially where I work and in some other parts of sub-Saharan Africa, where there's nothing you could use to convince a man to go for vasectomy. But I do agree that where this is acceptable, it should be part of the mix. And it goes back to Andrew's point about thinking through what we really mean by involving men. So involving men should include involving them in supporting their wives, involving them in communicating with their wives to support her health. It should also mean involving them in their own reproductive health. Earlier on, I talked about some statistics regarding the healthy lives lost by men and women, according to the WHO, accounted for reproductive health issues account for 1/3 for women and just 12% for men. So men have reproductive health issues as well, and we shouldn't forget that because many times it gets lost in the conversation. So part of ensuring that men's reproductive health needs are met is to make vasectomy available for those who are willing and able to obtain this method.
So on the my focus on the supply side and why should male reproductive services not be offered? They absolutely should. I wouldn't say that they should not be. I think though that what I'm arguing is that for reproductive services for women have a bigger meaning than they do for men. Men's reproductive health needs are not trivial or insignificant, and they matter a lot. But reproductive health needs for women, women reproduce, and that's the bottom line. It's not just that they reproduce, but a lot of women's disempowerment, the root of women's disempowerment is that historically societies have controlled women's sexuality and reproduction. So it is both a biological fact and the basis for gender inequality. So it has to have first and foremost priority. We haven't gotten that story right yet. And that's what I'm arguing is that we've got to get that foundational bit there. And absolutely, once we've accomplished that, we should be thinking about, and, getting men to use vasectomies. We haven't gotten practically any society that's not a non-Western society to have significant rates of vasectomy use. And even in many Western societies, rates have been going down rather than up. So this is not something that's going to be fixed by male involvement programs that, do a little bit of community mobilization or education. This is very deep set masculine and feminine ideals, and they're going to require social change that's much beyond family planning programs. So part of what I'm arguing also is that family planning programs need to do their job, and there are bigger social change issues that we're talking about, economic change issues, that we make liaisons with other sectors to create that kind of change rather than family planning programs taking that up all themselves.
Great, thanks. I guess this is a question for both teams. Is there not a compromise when we empower women and involve men at the same time? And is there a situation where one or the other strategy would be preferred? And then the other question is, what would you respond to people who view a focus on women for the empower women side or the couple reductionist, ignoring the wider family system? Do I need to repeat, or was that clear?
Can you repeat the question, please?
So the first question is there a compromise where we empower women and involve men at the same time? And is there a situation where one or the other strategy would be preferred? And then the second question is, what would you respond to people who view a focus on women or couples for the involved men side, that it's reductionist and ignores the wider family system?
If I may, so I'll take the first part of that question. I think that, yes, I mean, it's possible to have a compromise where we both empower women and then involve men. For the purposes of this debate, yes, we're trying to sort of giving limited funding, trying to see which would be preferred. Yes, we can empower women to better understand some of these family planning decisions or discussions that are ongoing, yes. And involving men also will make sure that their interests are aligned with their partners. But you see, when you ask, well, is there one that is preferred? I'd say that given as we are dealing with, a patriarchal society, right? We're dealing with a situation where men are the ultimate decision makers, within society, within these households. It's important that if you empower women without making sure that men are also on board with these programs, with these interventions, they are unlikely to yield much fruit, because my partner has already talked about the unintended consequences that women may experience. Yes, they may be knowledgeable about what the family programs interventions have to offer. They may want to take these decisions, but unless we are arguing that they can do this outside of the consent or the involvement of their husbands, this is unlikely to actually be beneficial. So yes, given available funding, we can have both these interventions running, but given the cultural context, it's very, very important that we do not leave men out of the equation. Given the patriarchal societies that these women and other people, we haven't even talked about mother-in-laws fully, health workers, who also have a say in the decision, the access to contraceptives, for example. We cannot expect women to work outside of these structures. It's important to bring in the male element if we want to see the most effective outcomes, in my view. Thank you.
Ellen here. So yes, we can have a compromise. But again, to the service providers, the policymakers, to the people behind there developing these different methods where we can have an opportunity of different methods available, so that the interpretation and understanding of male involvement will get away from just escorting this woman to the health facility, allowing her to use a method. The question here that comes in, how many methods are available for the men? If we talk about condoms, if we talk about vasectomy, can we have a number of them available for them to be able to make decisions, even when we are telling them, hey, we need you on board. We would like you to also support or to be involved. And again, this is a question to us that yes, we can have the compromise where we can have the different discussions going on, but in the given situation with what is available, the different methods that are available, perhaps we help this woman, this mother, this young girl to understand the available methods that are around, that she can be able to access them, because so far from the supply side, we have more of the methods that are available for the women. Unless we are saying we want to have that direction where we can have equal available services for both the men and the women, so that it ceases to be a woman's issue. Over to you.
Anybody else?
Nita, can you just repeat the question, because I've forgotten it now?
So there are two separate questions. So is there a compromise when we empower women and involve men at the same time? Is there a situation where one or the other strategy would be preferred? Then the second one is, what would your response be to people who view a focus on a woman or a couple reductionist, ignoring the wider family system?
Okay, so yes, I do think that there is a compromise, and I think that's precisely why we're having this debate. Right now, we try to do everything, and we don't have money. We don't have the capacity. We don't have good health systems. And, COVID has definitely shown us that health systems fall apart on essentials, very basics. You don't even have oxygen for people. You don't even classify family planning methods as essential medicine. So you have you have very weak health systems, and in those systems, you're trying to do everything and you can't. And so what I'm arguing is that you have to get the first and fundamental bit first, which is empowering women reproductively. Get good quality contraceptives that women need when they want, the type they want, into their hands with respect for women, and let them have choices. And then we can think about everything else. So yes, there's otherwise a compromise because you dilute the effect. Secondly, is it reductionist because you're not considering all these other people that may be involved? Yes, but it's also reductionist when you think that all women are in marital relationships and have partners. Many women are having sexual relationships that are not necessarily with the same partner. Their partners are not necessarily their husbands, and men may or may not be around to be involved. And not everybody is in a family situation that we're talking about. In fact, large proportions of women and men live in migrant situations, even when they are married. There are adolescents that we're talking about. We're talking about transactional sex. There's so many other environments in which saying male involvement in this traditional sense of a very husband-wife situation and a familial situation is very reductionist as well.
We're almost over time, but Dana, maybe we can do one more question if anything came up. Just let us know. Dana, can you hear me?
Yeah, there are a lot of great comments, but a lot of great discussion going on in the Q&A and the chat, but I'm looking for another question that's directed to either or both teams.
Looks like the poll is up, so if there isn't, we can just do the second poll to see if our debaters changed anybody's minds.
Can I just make a quick
Yes.
comment following what Anju said? I just want us to think about the fact that not all women want to be empowered, and not all men want to be involved in reproductive health related issues. So there will be individual differences within the cultural context. I just argue that we need to have services that include men, reproductive health services that both women and men can access, even when we have limited funds, so that those who want to opt in have a place to go, they can access services, and so that involving men will help to encourage communication between couples. So I argue that there's no one size fits all, and there will need to be contextual changes to whatever programs, whatever family planning programs exist.
Great, thanks, Funmi. Paul, I think is the poll up, or are people able to cast their second vote?
Yes, people have voted. Still a few that have not voted.
Okay, so we'll wait a second for the results and then we'll get final comments from Jean-Francois.
Okay.
And Neetu, if I may add while we are waiting, I think Funmi made a good point, but I think that to say that not all women want to be empowered, when you look at the numbers of unmet need, that's a little bit staggering. All women do want to have control over their reproduction. Women do want to be able to have kids when they want. Some of them may want to have them in terms of patriarchal norms, yes, but women would like to have control over their reproduction. So I think that that's the two are not to be equatable situations, and there is a prioritization there, and we do have to make prioritized choices given that we do have limited resources. And I saw in the chat box somebody saying, are we saying we should be putting family planning resources to educate girls, or things that are empowering to women. I just want to emphasize that that's precisely what I'm not arguing. What I'm arguing is that the education sector should be educating girls, and the family planning sector should be delivering better family planning services. We can have good alliances with those sectors, but we should be doing our job.
Maybe we can see the vote then, Tom, or Paul. Here we go.
It looks like involved men. Is it the before poll or the after poll?
This is the original poll.
Okay,
initial
so we have,
poll.
okay.
Okay, now.
Oh, there's a little movement. Good job, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Over to Francois.
Okay, thank you very much, Netu. First of all, I would like to thank our debaters for their insightful contribution to answering this relevant and topical question. And I can say that the question is very clear, but the answer at the other end is not as obvious. Opinions are divided, and as shown by the arguments, developed by the two sides. Even though we have seen just recently that the vote is in favor of Fahmi and Kechi, but I think it was something very, very, challenging in terms of arguments. And I will try to just sum up very quickly some key points I have, kept from the discussion. We had a lot of greed and insightful question and the comment from the participant, but I cannot go, through this all this, contribution. But just based on the presentation from our four debaters, I wanted to highlight some things, some arguments I kept. So I will start with Andrew and Helen, who were in favor of empowering women. And the argument is that it's important to further empower women because it helps women freely act in society, exercise their right, fulfill their potential, and assume leadership. In addition, giving women the decision-making power, it can also have positive impact on different dimensions of life, like in the health sector, in economy, can help reduce poverty at the household level. It can have a negative impact on mortality and maternal and health and child mortality, and also help women increase their decision-making power in the different spheres of a society. And another argument, developed by this side of the debate is the fact that it's important to give a priority to the supply side in terms of providing family planning services, and is important to address in that regard, to address women's needs and the barrier on family planning, ensure contraceptive choice and quality, and take some action on more supply than the demand side. And what I want to say regarding this this side of the debate is that finally they say that yes, involvement of men, demand issues are important, but we have to first ensure that the quality of the service are there. And regarding the opposite side, so the position, defended by Fahmi and Kechi, what we can learn is that they're starting first, highlighting the position of men in patriarchal societies. And Fahmi recalls some roles played by men in patriarchal society. First of all, men are key decision makers. They provide social recognition, and they are also the traditional breadwinners. In that regard, it's important to involve men when undertaking family planning program, to be sure that we are getting we are able actually to attain our objective in terms of giving opportunity to women to access to family planning services. So if women are out, this can have a very bad consequences in terms of efficiency of a family planning program. So men must be part, part of this program. Men must be on board actually. And still, when you look at the conclusion, given by Ketchi, still on this side of a debate, is that involving women can help actually increase women's position in the household, and empower women without involving men and leaving men out. Will not help us, actually, resolve the equation of family planning decision making, and also involving men can also help clear up what they call myths and misconception regarding reproduction. And family. One of these myths or misconception is that family planning is mostly a women issue, women matters. So involving men can also help, clear up this kind of a misconception. And also involving men can play a role as a buffer between women and the cultural custom. Example, for example, the mothers-in-law regarding the need to have a very, big families to perpetuate the family. So these are the arguments developed, the main argument developed by the other side, those are in favor of involving men. So as we can see, to me, finally, what I want to say is that it seems that despite the limited resources, there is a need in some particular contexts like patriarchal societies to involve men in some extent. I think this is very important. When we are talking about empowering women, it's generally about giving them greater access to education, a higher level of education, enable them to access greater economic resource, and so that they can make the individual choices in matters of fertility. And even there, we need to have more involvement of men, so to be sure that this women empowerment will, give, actually a woman more decision power to play or to access their potential and to play. To access what they want to do in the society. And I just want to say that even in some settings, wanted to highlight a recent study on the determinant of women's success in Ouagadougou. It appears from the qualitative, discourse of women, but even those who are more educated responded that the consent of the husband was, a requirement, was crucial, to allow them to undertake an economic activity. So yes, education is important, empowering women is important, but at the same time, we need, in some extent, more involvement of men. In conclusion, I will say, yes, it is key to empower women, but at the same time, we cannot avoid the specificity and social norms and values regarding gender relations in some settings. And I like this point raised during the debate, saying that we can have a kind of compromise between empowering women and involving men. So these are the points I wanted to raise. I would like to thank you again, Andrew, Ellen, Fanmi, and Ketchi for your much appreciated contribution to this debate. Thank you to Stan and Netu for organizing this And thank you to the IUSSP Secretariat for the support. And finally, thanks to all of you for attending and for your great comment and question.
Okay, back to me, I guess. Oops. Thank you. Yes, so I had a couple quick things to say from what I heard. First, I wonder what we talked about long-term. How long is long-term? Second thing, I've done quite a few couple interventions. And the obvious rule there is you always check with a woman if she wants to involve her partner or not. That wasn't said, but certainly it needs to be said. The third is I really like these like debates. I believe in the conflict theory of learning. So if Tom LeGrand has hypothesis A, I'll take hypothesis not A, and we'll look at the data. That's why we need some good studies to further things. And so we may have a future a debate to this panel. We're going to talk about that in the days ahead. And then finally, I'd also like to thank the panelists as well as Neetu and Dana. And Hilary Schwand helped get the question formalized, and Madeline Short-Fabig gave some of the names of folks who presented today. So I'd like to thank everybody, including those who listened in. And over to Tom.
Thank you, Stan. I just want to thank everybody once again, just like Stan, the entire group. I've always been somewhat skeptical about debates. I've seen debates in the past that tend to take exaggerated positions. You don't see the nuances, and it's not that informative. This debate has been superb. You see the nuances. The panelists had very strong, clear positions, but they recognize the nuances. And I think this is the best sort of debate that you can have. My takeaway from this, over and beyond the substantive aspects of this event, is that I think that the IUSSP should continue doing this. This was really very good, and I want to thank everybody for participating. And one final last reminder, the International Population Conference is coming up. I hope everyone will make an effort to participate. And I fully expect that we are going to have some debates there. Thank you very much.
Over and out.